Hey Jolene, welcome to the DevOps Diaries podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Jolene, why don't you do a little bit of an introduction about yourself for the listeners here?
Yeah, no worries. I'm Jolene. I've been in the Salesforce world for about 6 years now. I'm currently working with a company called HackerOne, who are a cybersecurity company. I do the Salesforce technical side over with them. Work closely with a kind of revenue sales ops team. But yeah, bit of a weird career how we got in there. A longer story, but yeah, I've got a blog on the Gearset website if you want to know more, and find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Working for HackerOne, cybersecurity, and a topic that we're going to be exploring quite a bit today, central to security, Salesforce backup. Jolene, why is Salesforce backup important?
Salesforce is your data. Without your data in Salesforce, Salesforce is not really there. So you can spend as much money or do what you like with Salesforce, but really without that data in there, it's pretty useless to you. So if you're not backing up that part, yeah, you're going to find yourself in a bit of a scenario. The complexities for data in general are hard. Add Salesforce into that mix and it gets a little bit more complex. So yeah, it really is a topic that you shouldn't ever skip over when you're looking at that security world of how you should secure your org and kind of prevent anything from happening or recover for it if it does happen.
Yeah, you mentioned the complexities in introducing Salesforce and data from other streams. What's particularly about Salesforce or CRM systems in general layer complexity into our operations?
Salesforce isn't your typical database. It's not a very flat structure. It's got so many complexities to it. And then the more you configure it, the more complex that's going to get as you go along. And if you try and just say, okay, I've got a bunch of data here I want to put back in without having a tool to kind of help me do that, you're going to spend hours upon hours just finding that right chain of how things should go in, what validation rules am I hitting, how should the data look. You'll spend more time in CSVs than I think you'd ever want to spend. And that's why, yeah, Salesforce is always that little step up from looking at your flat data structure that's usually in a kind of relational database that you would typically see.
Yeah. So just diving into that for listeners to the podcast that might be a little bit newer into this Salesforce ecosystem, explain a little bit how the data structure in Salesforce works and the differences between metadata and data, because that tends to be one of the typical tripping points that I see a lot of folks make, is that distinction between data and metadata and the importance of both when it comes to backing up Salesforce.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Most people think when they think of data backup, they think of their core customer or whatever that data is that they're storing in Salesforce. But everything that makes your Salesforce is also data in some form or structure, but kind of known as metadata. If we're talking kind of your customer data, the typical structure for that, it will start with a kind of high level parent type object. Take account, for example, and you're going to have a bunch of different records that are going to branch off of that that will be related to it in some form or another through one of the relationships you can choose. It's similar, if you ever looked at a database, it's similar, but it's not similar at the same time. So if you don't know those relationships, you don't know how they sign back up and what you need to know before you put that data in, it can become a really messy job and it's time consuming. If you've got nothing structuring that for you on the way back in and you're doing it all by hand, it's messy. It's the bigger the org, the harder that's going to become. And yeah, it very quickly gets to that point, no matter how young your Salesforce org is or how new you're going to be to it. And then if you look at metadata, that's a really similar story. The more you customize, the more metadata you're going to have. But if something happens to your actual Salesforce org, what would you do if you don't have a copy of what you've done to it? And you've got to think of that as that's your package of Salesforce. That's your customizations and the things that make your Salesforce yours. And if you've not took that and stored it somewhere in a repository or in a backup solution, and something happens and that goes somewhere and you get given a fresh new org to start again with, you've got nothing left. You're going to have to start from the beginning, and nobody's going to remember everything that was in there, what it was doing, and that's then going to in turn make it even harder for your data to go back in when you want to put your data back in, because you've got none of that customizations and all the fields that you've got on your data stored back to those customizations. So if you break a link, even the smallest, you're going to run into big problems.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned spending a lot of time in CSVs that you don't want to be doing if you lose your data. Why is that typically that we spend our time in CSVs? And what can we do to avoid spending time in CSVs or wrestling with Salesforce's data loader?
That's your raw form of data basically, and that's where you're going to want to build up the structure of how you want to go in. And if you're using those traditional tools like data loader that you mentioned, CSVs is what you're going to upload to there. So in whatever form you receive that data, one way or another, you're going to have to transform it or order it or do something to it within that CSV file before you then pop that through data loader back into Salesforce. And then even when you get to data loader, you've got to pick your order of fields and what ones you're storing, what ones you're ignoring. If they're not named right, they'll not map properly. And that's all got, someone has to know all of that to do all of that. And that's usually where the tricky part comes, because Salesforce orgs develop over time. They're not one person's done everything and knows everything. So it becomes a bit of a tricky, risky business that if you've not kept track of that, how would you know what you're putting back in really? So that's where, for me, the importance of a tool really comes in to help that process.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned about not everybody knows every change that's happened over time to an org as it grows, as it develops. Salesforce often starts as a small thing in a lot of organizations and grows to the behemoth tier one enterprise application in a lot of businesses. Who's responsible for data backup in your mind then? In the Salesforce team, or is it an external team, or who do you think the responsibility ultimately lies with? Because that can be a challenge if lots of people are working on separate parts of Salesforce or different objects or what have you. Who do you think the overall responsibility lies with when it comes to making sure that your Salesforce data or metadata is backed up, and knowing that in the event of a restoration situation, knows what needs to go back in?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think every place is different. I think, and the more I've been in different industries in Salesforce, the way Salesforce teams are made up are largely fluid. You could have a whole structured team in an enterprise versus a small startup like ourselves that doesn't have a huge big team of people behind it. So it really depends on your company and what works for you. But I think the key things that you've got to take away of who's in charge of these things or who's responsible is they need to know Salesforce. So they need to at least have all that understanding of the nuances of the data, the tools that you're using to put that data back in. And yeah, what's the importance of what? At least have that basic understanding of what's the key important things, what's your critical data, and the rest you can kind of figure out after. And again, you want to make sure you've not got a single source of kind of failure. More than one person. You have to have more than one, regardless of whether they're usually in your Salesforce team or they've upskilled and they maybe sit outside in your data team or your IT team. You have to have at least more than one person so that if they're not around, they can pick up and do at the very minimum, the bare minimum, to get you back to a kind of working state. And that's always the aim, I think, when you're trying to recover, is you don't want to do everything at once. You want that critical stuff back in first and give yourself that time to kind of move forward, so you can have different people fulfilling parts of that role of who's responsible for critical versus non-critical. And yeah, hopefully you'll build up something that works for each company, basically.
Yeah, you started to touch on so many little bits of this complex topic that I want to dive into. But the way that you speak about it makes me think that you may have been in a situation where you've lost data before and had to do this yourself. Is that the case? And can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Thankfully, I've never been in anything big. So, and that's a good thing. Like, I've never been in a situation where we've lost an entire org or millions of records. But we have been in situations where we've lost 1,000 records here or 100 records here. No matter how minimal your data loss is, it's going to impact somewhere. And it could be 10 records you're putting back in, but when you start to break down, if you've got another 20 custom objects related to that, and it's a whole host of things going in, it's just time consuming. And that's where if you're spending lots of times in CSVs trying to piece this puzzle back together, mistakes will be made. You're relying on a human person that hopefully knows all of these customizations that have went on over the course of the years and can piece this puzzle back together for you. And that's where the time constraint will come in. It will slow you down. You will hit walls and you'll be like, okay, I didn't realise that validation rule fires here and I'll need to turn this off over here. And a lot of orgs haven't even accounted for doing things like that by building in switches to turn things off if you need to so that you can get things through quickly. And yeah, that's usually where the pain points I've came across, that it's never been a large volume. We've never had a total outage. But for me, no matter how little that loss is, unless you're dealing with just one record, you're going to have problems when you try and build that picture back up for that customer profile and put that back in.
Yeah, so the time and level of effort required to restore in any scenario can be detrimental to the impact of your ongoing development work. How? So you've used an example there where you've lost a handful of records here, a handful of records there. What kind of impact does even that have? Like, not in just like the immediate term for you and your team and losing that level of productivity, but do we typically see like an impact on users and not being able to do their jobs effectively, or any knock-on effect to the business operations in general?
I've found over the times that it's happened to us, if it's not been something as a direct result of a change that's happened or something that we actioned that we knew that happened there and then and we could action on it and fix it, you typically find it's the user that's going to come to you and say, I can't find X, Y, and Z. Because if you've not got a backup tool, the chances are you've not got no monitoring in place to check this stuff leaving your org. And yeah, if there's no perfect picture of the security world where you're limiting who can delete, or things happen, accidents happen, and even that one record going, if it was an accidental delete by someone, it could have had an effect on the next person that comes along, expecting to see it and work with it. Could have had a meeting with a customer. And usually that's where the time constraint comes in. It's like, okay, I've got a certain thing I need to do with that account by this time, and it's not there anymore. How do we get it back so I can continue doing it without the customer ever knowing anything even happened on your end, and it's good to go. As I say, it's always been minimal, but there's always been some form of time constraint, whether it's been because we done it and we recognise that we've done it and we want to rectify it straight away, or it's been a flip where we had no idea it happened, but someone has notified us that they're missing. And then you've got that whole process of tracking the data back down and getting it back to where it needs to be. And yeah, there's always a time constraint, and everyone wants it back yesterday.
Yeah, so it's always the top priority, no matter what else you've got going on. Data's gone.
Yeah.
That shoots straight to the top of the jobs to be done list.
I mean, I've seen myself literally spend hours on an evening, weekend to get that done, because that would be what you would class as a critical, drop everything, it needs to happen, and then it's hard to pull away from that and say, okay, I'll stop, it's the weekend and we'll get that data back on Monday, because that's not really good enough. You need it back today. So yeah, I've been in situations that the time it's such a constraint for everyone. I think that you've got to do it against the time schedule, but no matter what, it's going to take time.
So relying on users isn't the best way to make sure that you understand when you've lost data. A little bit different if you do a release and something breaks and it causes data loss. You know, the team's done that, the team's responsible for that, we can fix that straight away. We kind of have an idea of what happened. A bit of a point that you were alluding to, relying on users there to come to tell you that it's lost without a tool or some level of observability is really difficult. What can we do to make sure that we have better observability, and how has having a data backup solution for Salesforce impacted your team?
For me, it's been a game changer. So I've been in the situations that we've just been discussing where I've not had this stuff. So I know the flip coin of not having it. And even if you've built yourself a little Apex log and it's going to email alert you, it's never going to be robust. It's never trustworthy. Something can go wrong with that. Having a tool that you know is dedicated to monitoring your org, it's going to alert you. You're getting those daily, hourly, or however much you've customized it to tell you when things are happening, how it happens. You can pinpoint your most important objects. We've got hourly backups running as well as nightly backups. It just gives you that confidence that even if something went wrong with that tool in the last day, it was working the day before, so you've got backups the day before. It's giving you as much as it absolutely can back out your org so that you can recover to the least amount of time possible, basically. That there's no downtime, you know about it, you can be proactive, you can fix it, hopefully before anyone even noticed that it was gone. The user's not even realised that record that they were working with yesterday was missing for 2 hours. We put it back in and it's back to normal. And that for me, it's been a game changer. Been able to see everything happen. We've never been in an instant, thankfully, here where anything's been lost, but we play about with it regularly in sandboxes to make sure we're using it properly and stuff. And it's been an absolute game changer for us, and the monitoring is really good.
Oh, excellent. That brings me on really nicely to something else that I wanted to ask you as well. So, we've spoken a little bit about how long it can take to restore records without a solution. But even if you didn't have a solution, you've mentioned testing the solution in sandboxes and preparing for disaster kind of scenarios. Part of that would be what we would call part of like a disaster recovery plan. And something that I advocate for a lot is making sure that number one, that you have one, and number two, that it's fit for purpose. So can you tell me a little bit about your kind of disaster recovering planning scenarios? And you mentioned using sandboxes there to test out that the solution works and has everything that you need to in the event of a real life scenario. What are some of the considerations, do you think, for folks that are looking at buying a backup solution or investing in a backup solution to make sure that they can use it in the event of disaster?
I think of it like you would if you're doing anything in your own org, if you're making a change in your own org, cover everything. Think of all your scenarios, bases, time frames, test it, have everyone that's involved in that team of people that's going to be doing it, testing it for their little PCs. Make sure you've got someone that can fall back on if you're not around on that one particular minute that happened. And I think the most important part is test it. There's no point in having the tool and thankfully most people don't want to ever find themselves in the position where they need to use the tool. It's a risk mitigation, so you still don't want to have the risk, but at the same time you want to be able to use it. So if you've bought it and you're not using it, even if you've not had data loss, you've got sandboxes, spin them up, put a bunch of data in there, delete it back out again, and try and put it back in, and you'll soon find that you'll see all those little nuances that you need to think about and plan for, that if that particular scenario happened, how long is that going to take? You can go back to the business and say, well, we'll have the data back for you in 4 hours. We can give you that confidently because we've done that very similar scenario previously, and that makes I think it makes a lot more peace of mind, and it's a lot more of a clear picture you're building when you say, okay, here's your data that's lost, but here's the time frame we can get that back for you. So if you do have to put customer meetings back or whatever that impact's been, you can at least do it confidently by saying, well, I'm going to put it back by a few hours. I know I'll have what I need back by then, and I can carry on working. And you're minimising that time even more. No matter what way you look at it, you're going to lose time. It's just about shortening that time period. And that's for me where testing that plan will allow you to do that. The more you do it, the quicker you'll get at it, the quicker, like I say, you'll find the little pieces that you need to know about and build in for, and find out who you need to have on calls, who's going to notify you, what do you do if it's out of hours. These are the things that are never thought about until it happens. And I think the last part is adapt it as you go. Nothing's perfect. If you've never done it before, do it once, learn from it, keep changing it, and you'll probably never stop that process. I think like everything, it's all going to keep moving until you're at a point where you've got a kind of confident process that you can trust in that will work for you.
Yeah, that's such good advice. We speak a lot about DevOps, and you are very graciously one of Gearset's DevOps leaders this year, which is awesome. But when we talk about DevOps is all about continuous iteration and continuous improvement, and that's such a good point that you've made about nothing's going to be fit for use. It was fit for use yesterday when you built it, but it might be not fit for use tomorrow or next week, or definitely not next month, based on all those stakeholders that you mentioned. I think that's something that we don't talk about in terms of data backup enough either, is working with stakeholders to understand what an acceptable recovery time objective is there. So recovery time objective is what you've been talking about with, we can get it back in 4 hours, and understanding with the business whether that's acceptable or not, and then reframing that or realigning your process to say, no, we need a recovery time of 2 hours or 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever it is, and then being able to come back to that and tweak that process as you see fit. With the solution as well, so in the State of Salesforce DevOps Report 2024 this year that Gearset conducted, 13% of Salesforce teams currently don't have a backup solution and don't plan to invest in one this year. What would you say to those people?
It's a hard one because I've been on this side of the coin. It's a really, really hard one. I understand the complexities of Salesforce teams, the cost of Salesforce teams. It's an expensive product that comes with expensive staffing costs, and then you've got other tools that branch off from it. I understand why it usually gets left off, but until you need it, you wish you had it. And when you don't have it, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't then come chapping the door and say, can we have your backup solution to fix today's problem? Because it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. You have to have it in place first. I hope that those 13% have at least some form of backup solution, whether that is that they're just pulling the data into a flat relational database and they'll spend days upon days piecing it back together. If you're not at least storing the data somewhere, that's worrying because one day you will find yourself in a position where you'll lose something. And like I say, whether it's 10 records or 100 records, there's going to be some form of impact that comes off that. I'm a big advocate for Salesforce tools, and that's in general for DevOps. It's a slow world that we're trying to change, and a world that needs to change. I've only been in Salesforce for 6 years, and I've been in every stage of this process, and it's a painful process when you don't have the right tools. A very painful process, and it's not just for the people doing the job. It's for the, like you say, the impact of the users that can't then do their job because you've took so long to put something back, or whatever's been the outcome of, yeah, anything that falls off the back of it. But yeah, it's a high number. It doesn't seem like 13% is not bad, but it's a high number not doing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's such a there's always that kind of famous saying that goes around. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. I think the first time I ever heard that was in the film Alien versus Predator when they're talking about taking a gun into the middle of the Arctic. You don't need it. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And then there you go. Aliens appear and then need it. So it's kind of that kind of scenario. If anyone's seen that film, pop culture reference for everybody there. Following on from that statistic, 23% of Salesforce teams in the same survey said that they are looking or planning to adopt a solution this year, which is great news. So quite a lot of Salesforce teams don't have a solution in place, but 23% are looking to adopt a solution. For those teams that are looking to adopt a solution, what are the main considerations when they go out and look at the various solutions on the market, whether it be Salesforce, Gearset, another vendor, or a generic tool that might be used for backing up enterprise solutions like Microsoft or like a generic vendor, if you like? What are some of the main considerations for those teams?
I think my biggest advice is always don't find a tool that you're not trying to kind of put a square peg in a round hole here. So make sure your tool works for you. If it doesn't work for you, take it straight off your list. But you really need to know what you want. So thinking about those things that we're speaking about how long do you want a recovery time of, etc., because that's all going to feed into your solution. If you're looking for the quickest, easiest thing to do, the simple answer is find a Salesforce specific tool. If you don't care how long it takes, you just want to make sure you've got your data backed up and you're covering those minimal bases, then yeah, I can see why you might not want to go down that route. You might want more of a catch-all, can cover the entire business. It's a huge mindset shift to say, okay, well, we've got this one tool, we need to kind of take this specific kind of tool to then do a portion of that job of backing up for us. But that time saving benefit that you're going to get from it, they, I could list the benefits on and on and on, but it really does wonder how much that do you need as well from the tool. So if you look at Gearset, for example, it's not just data backup. You've got a whole host of DevOps software coming off of it. Do you need that? If you do, then you really want to look in those solutions that do a more catch-all, cover more bases. It's one tool to learn, it's one UI to be familiar with, it's one support team. If you're not needing all those things and you've got all them kind of sorted and you're looking for more just a specific backup solution, then that's kind of fair to start looking at other options and see where else would work for you. But get those goals in mind first. Don't just go into it blindly thinking it's just a backup solution. It's just going to store my data and one day I'll hit a button and it'll do what I want. Keep in mind those complexities because they're still there, whether you've got a tool or not. There's still those complexities of the rules, how much data you're putting back in, the relationships, and each tool's different and how it's going to help you solve that problem. So it's going to be how it works for your team, who's going to be the people using it, etc. How does that fit in with your budget? But go for it. It's usually my biggest advice. Go start exploring the solutions, try them out, make sure you get a kind of POC ongoing, see how it works for you, and see how it fits in with those goals that you've got in mind to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Something that you mentioned as well, Salesforce is in of itself is expensive. Staffing a Salesforce org is expensive as well, and this can be seen as another additional cost center. What would you say is kind of the key thing for folks in Salesforce teams to be able to go to their leaders and say, we need more money and we need it for this, and this is why? What is the most compelling why that you can give senior leadership for more money to invest in a solution?
So for me, the biggest one's always your time saving benefit. So with time, you're paying for a resource, and resources, no matter what way you try and look at it, will always be more expensive in the Salesforce world than the tools will be. Uh, I can't think of a tool off the top of my head that's going to cost more to implement than what a person would be to do exactly what that tool's doing for you. So if you can take away the cost of that person per se, or not hire a person to do that job, but your tool's going to help do it, or it's saving your existing team, which means they can focus on the stuff your business actually wants and needs, the development work or the admin work that they should be concentrating on, and not things like this. If your developers are spending all their time on DevOps, backup, that is a bit of a wasted resource, and you should then take tools to take that away. Don't replace it with a person, because it's not something any one person probably particularly wants to spend their life doing, when there's tools out there that everyone can then get involved in. It's a team effort, and that's probably another point to hone in on, is when you go for Salesforce specific tools, you open it up to be more team friendly and more, it's not just a developer thing, or there's someone that really needs to train on this to make sure they know how to use it. The usability becomes more broader, and you can actually onboard way more people and get them more involved in the process than you ever thought was possible. Gearset for like DevOps is a massive example of that, in terms of admins can now go on there and do pull requests, and they are part of GitHub, and they are doing things that if you go back 5 years probably weren't ever really thought was possible for them. And that's without them having to sit there and do loads of Git training or any of that. And backup can be the same thing. You don't have to spend hours and hours and hours as a resource or on training, when you can have a tool that takes away that pain point for you, and use your people for what they're good for.
Yeah, such sound and great advice. You know, being able to be in a team and work on the things that you're paid to do. You know, you're not paid to do a restoration at the end of the day. You're paid to come and implement solutions, and that is far more fulfilling from like a human perspective and a team perspective, and far more motivating than going, all I do is spend my time putting out fires, in terms of like kind of workload. And I think that's such a great point, and something that I think every team should definitely consider, and you're right to hone in on it. For sure. What would you say in terms of having that level of security and confidence to develop quicker, knowing that you have a solution to save you if things do go wrong? Is that something that you've kind of seen enabled in your team, that you've got that fallback in case something does go wrong? Has it impacted velocity or development speed or anything like that that's also tangibly giving benefit to users faster, just because you have a backup solution?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, none of this takes away your processes around testing and all the usual stuff that you've got, but you definitely do a little less, and you are less worried about it. There's less stress on, okay, what could the impact be if we deploy this? Should we be doing it out of hours, or could we do it just now? And that kind of melts away. The longer you use the tools, the more confident you become, and you go, do you know what, if the worst happens, I click that button. And especially if you're talking about metadata deployments, you're back. And you could flip the coin without anyone really noticing anything went wrong. Data can take a little bit longer, so that's still got a bigger risk attached to it when you're doing any kind of big data deployments. But it's still way easier. So we do the usual kind of big data deployments around end of quarter, end of year, etc. And we do that with way more confidence, knowing that the data that we're changing, we have an exact backup of. And especially in our core objects, we've got one of the kind of high frequency backup jobs that gives us every hour. So our core data that we would never really want to lose much of, we've got that backed up every hour. So no matter what we do, if that backup fails or human error happens, it happens. Like, we can't ever forget that we're all people and we make mistakes. It's easy to backtrack out of it. And yeah, nobody feels as bad. There's no big drama being caused by it, and yeah, opens up a lot of doors. And I definitely think it makes it more confident for me. I don't feel the pressure being kind of the technical person that's in charge of the tool, looking after everything. I'm like, well, if things do go wrong, they know how to fix it themselves. They know how to get themselves back to a good state. It doesn't need me. I can safely take a day off and walk away and leave my laptop at home and know that the world's not going to burn round about me. And yeah, I've noticed before in previous jobs that that's not always the case when you don't have good processes to and good tools to help you manage those processes and put the confidence back in the user's hand and the person that's doing it rather than one person or yeah, a couple.
Yeah, people, process, technology, that age-old adage, right?
Hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jolene, thank you so much for your insights into backing up our Salesforce instances and making us all more confident in our ability to do our day-to-day jobs. I think that's such an important topic, and we all want that security that we can go about our jobs and be protected and feel confident in what we're doing, and that we have systems there to support us when things go wrong, because things do go wrong. Something I always like to say is just like, you need a backup solution for when things go wrong, not if they go wrong, because they will at some point.
They will.
Is there any last piece of advice that you'd like to leave for the listeners, or any recommendations that we haven't touched on throughout the episode?
I think for me, my parting words would be exactly what you're saying. Backup can't be forgot. Push it higher up your list. If you're listening and it's number 5 in your priority, make it number 4. Even if it's one step higher, it should be up there. Don't forget about it. Don't try and cut corners with it. Don't try and cut costs, because that's where you'll get bitten in the bum the most when it comes back. And like you say, it's not if, it will be when. At some point, something, no matter how minor, is going to happen, and you'll think, oh, okay, I wish I did have that.
Perfect. Jolene, thank you so much. Listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on the platform that you're listening on. It really helps us out to carry on bringing you great episodes and great insights like the ones that we have just had with Jolene. And Jolene, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.